in growing up in Sri Lanka and having the privilege of living in the United States and going back to Sri Lanka, there are several things I would consider to be very significant in Sri Lanka, events that are significant in Sri Lanka. One would be the conflict itself, the changing dynamics of the conflict and how it has impacted people's lives, how it had been able to tear apart people's lives, because I've had the privilege of talking with and learning from people who have directly been impacted by the conflict. So that would consider that to be a very significant thing, and now the Western media has been able to cover a little bit of the conflict, so people outside of Sri Lanka or the South Asian continent know about it. Another significant time in the country is the tsunami itself, for many reasons, some including that the flow of money, this flow of the generosity the world community showed on Sri Lanka had created a lot of opportunities for people, but it also created a lot of challenges for people. Money doesn't always equate to opportunities and prosperity. It also equates to more suffering and struggle. And after the tsunami, we were able to really see that. And still, we see that a lot of people whose houses were promised have not gotten houses. Some of the houses that were built are still not livable, or people are not even living in those houses. So it has created a lot of dynamics that, as an international community, we are learning about it. And for me, it's a great opportunity to learn about how people respond to natural disasters, but also how people can learn from the mistakes we are making. So our next response is a little more informed when we do this, so we don't continue to do more harm than good when we respond to natural disasters or human man-made conflicts. If the world was listening to me, I feel like I would be very privileged and humbled by the opportunity to speak to the world, so that the daunting task is very daunting to answer that question. The question of what would I like to share to the world. I think that I can share a lot of different things from my own personal experiences. Being humble, I go back to my parents' values and to talk about it from what my parents instilled in me. The values of being humble, the value of continuously trying to help someone in need, be of service to people, are things that I would continue to live up to and also like to share with others. Another thing I'd like to share is that the spirit and energy young people have. I've seen from many conflict-affected areas, natural disaster-affected areas, how young people are able to overcome challenges and do amazing things. The tsunami taught me some amazing lessons, what I learned from a young boy who is one of my role models named Spathum, who lost so much in a moment in his life on the tsunami. And when I asked him after an hour-long conversation, I asked him what he needs. He says, I need to stay in school. He lost his family, he lost his home, and he lost all his belongings, and he still continues to say he wants to stay in school. Then I asked him what he needs for that. He said, what I really need right now is my sister to sit for her final exam, and she lost all her study notes. And I would love for her to be provided with those study notes so she can sit for an exam. This is a 12-year-old boy, and to me, he's a role model in that sense. And I want to share to the world that young people need to be invested in, not in a context of making them dependent on you, but empowering them to make decisions on their own, providing them the space and the capacity to do what they are good at doing, and letting them do it. And I think that's a really, really important element for me, because that is also who I am and how I work. And a lot of the work I focus on when it focuses on young people is on building their capacity, but avoiding any dependency that may create, but creating the space for them to be empowered themselves. And I also like to share to the world that it's important to make mistakes. Do everything you can and make mistakes so you can learn from those mistakes. Don't just achieve things for the sake of achieving them, but if you make mistakes, you can use that as an opportunity to learn from them, because that's where the magic happens also. We often think that if something doesn't happen the way we want it to happen, if we feel like we are a failure. And I consider that as an opportunity to do things differently and also learn from it. So I think it's also important to fail in things. And lastly, to tell the world that we have to really be careful of how we do things. I think progress is very good for people, but also it's a challenge for people. If you look around us, we hear about environmental degradation. We have to be concerned about the environment, from the global warming to human conflict. But within that is the spirit of who we are as humans. Instead of thinking with our heads, we really need to think from our hearts and act from our hearts. I think that's really important for us as a human species, as a culture. We need to start thinking not just from our heads, but from our hearts before we act with our hands. So those are the things that I would like to share with the world.